This week on the agenda, talking trade, as Chinese and US officials meet for the third time and Trump strikes deals with the EU and others. Just where do things stand when it comes to global commerce? It has been a busy week for global trade negotiations. After Donald Trump made a deal with EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen last Sunday, US trade negotiators met their Chinese counterparts in Stockholm, the third such meeting in as many months. There have also been US trade deals or ongoing negotiations with the likes of Japan and South Korea and India. So, 6 months after Trump stepped back in the White House, looking like he wanted to upend the rules of global trade, just where are we now? With me to consider just that are Jeff Moon, former Assistant US Trade Representative for China, Andrew Sheng, Distinguished Fellow at the Asia Global Institute at the University of Hong Kong, and member of the International Council of Advisors at the National Financial Regulatory Administration, Jing, Distinguished Professor and Director of the Center for American and Pacific Studies at Shanghai International Studies University, and David Henig, Director of the UK Trade Policy Project. Gentlemen, thank you all so much for coming on the agenda. Jeff, let's start with you, because we had 2 days of constructive trade talks in Stockholm, but yet no major breakthrough. What has changed?
I think that there were 3 achievements at Stockholm. First of all, the parties wanted to check in to make sure that agreements and the consensus reached in London and Geneva were still on track, and that seems to be the case. Second, the discussions and the topics for discussion expanded to include the industrial policy issues that are really at the heart of the relationship. And then third, I think that the meetings promoted overall US-China relations. It's no secret that they're aiming for a summit this fall, and that diplomatic track can't be derailed by the trade track. And it seems that the trade track is working well, and that summit is still a possibility.
US officials said it was up to Trump to decide whether or not to extend the trade truce. How do you think China sees it?
I agree with Jeff. This is a total relationship issue. President Trump is clearly the decision maker, but he's known to change his mind. And there are so many details. It's a very complex set of negotiations. You can see that even in the negotiations or announcements with Japan, South Korea, and European Union, there are a lot of side issues that have not been very clear in terms of interpretation, particularly on the other side. That means European, Japan, and South Korea.
Huang, it was US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent who described those talks as constructive, but he also criticised China's economic model, saying the US hasn't seen an unbalanced economy like China since the 1800s. It's a real problem, isn't it, if the US thinks it can dictate how China runs its economy for 1.4 billion people?
Of course, it has been a problem for the US side, for China's overproduction and also industrial policy. But of course, like you said, China will do things on its way, will not be dictated by the United States. But what has been interesting or intriguing about this is that on the US side, there seems 2 tracks which independent of each other, 2 tracks of talks going on, just like Jeff said. One, we have Rubio and Wang Yi, the other one, Benson and Hurley Feng. And what seems strange to me or intriguing to me that looks like the 2 tribes, they don't talk to each other, they don't communicate with each other. There's no coordination at all. But the positive side, of course, both sides said is constructive, and both sides, they want to keep it going. And Benson repeated again and again, says there's no decoupling problem. And from Donald Trump's tweet, we can also see that he's quite positive to the extent sometimes even like he's trying to please China's side on those issues. So I agree with Jeff that is a great possibility the summit is coming. And on the other hand, I think it's very complicated for the trade talk between Benson and Hurley Feng because, like Jeff said, the topic has been expanded, very complicated, And in my view, it has get into deep water, which involve not only the conflict interest between two countries, but also the conflict interest within each country, in United States and China. I would argue that the most formidable challenge for Benson and her reform may come from their own side, from United States and China, from within, not from the other side. In other words, it's the internal coordination, and it's more difficult for China and for the United States. I would argue it's more difficult for the United States, largely because President Trump is very transactional and he doesn't talk to anyone. But everybody has to listen to him, and he just keep changing his mind.
David, the EU has, of course, now got its framework deal with the United States, as does the UK, South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and so on. But what do you think maybe sets China apart from other economies in trade talks?
I think it is the centrality of China's place in the world economy now as the world's second largest economy to the US. And I think what the brief trade war demonstrated earlier in the year is that, yes, the US would like to manufacture more itself. It would like to reduce imports from China, but that is going to be very difficult given the way that the global economic system works. And so, if you like, you have completely conflicting objectives here within the US. Yes, you want to make more things, but you don't want to completely disrupt the US economy. You do want to be a stronger economy than China in a way, but China has those strengths over the US. And I don't think that is all too sophisticated. As was just said, President Trump is rather transactional. He looks at numbers, tariff numbers. Is it 20%? Is it 40%? The relationship between the US and China just simply cannot be reduced to those kind of numbers and achieve some of the sophisticated goals that the US would like to achieve. And I rather think as well that the analysis from China on how to handle President Trump has been pretty sophisticated in terms of the levers that they can pull in order to disrupt him and the US economy, and that therefore you have, if you like, the more equal competition than you have with any other relationship, and one that so far is eluding this administration, but to be fair, I think arguably has eluded the previous administrations as well.
Jeff, would you agree with that? A complicated relationship which is a very tight rope of a balance to get? I mean, why do you think that the talks with China are also particularly complex? Is it down to this apparently negative view in the US of China's economy?
I would say that the US-China negotiations are fundamentally different from those of the US negotiations with other countries.
Yeah.
These are negotiations about issues that have been going on for 30 years. We've had 3 trade wars, 1993 to 1994 during Trump's first term, and now during his second term. The fundamental problem here is the experiment of bringing China as a state-led economy into the market-led WTO, and China's current status as still a state-led economy. That leads to many distortions, overcapacity, subsidies, and other problems that have global impacts that have been very difficult to address. And those are the fundamental problems that have to be gotten to before there will be any other resolution. Otherwise, this turmoil is going to go on indefinitely.
Andrew, the IMF this week raised its global growth outlook, but it did flag a potential rebound in tariff rates as a major risk. What's your outlook for the global economy?
Well, this is exactly what we're all talking about. The global economy is highly entangled economies.
Yeah.
You know, each economy is so entangled in each other in supply chains. Payment systems, financial systems, you know, cultural ties, etc., that is very difficult to have a divorce. It's not as simple as the simple numbers, as David has said. So what we're looking at is that the global economy at the financial market levels, you know, the US, you know, stock markets are highest ever. The rest of the world sees some risk of slowdown. Inflation has not come up as much as people, you know, thought it would be, but I think they will come. there are some risks to global slowdown, but everything depends upon everyone else. And if the US economy continues to power ahead, the slowdown may not be as big as people think.
Huang, what would you say are the broader economic issues, particularly between the US and China? Is it semiconductors? Is it the autos?
Yeah, the big picture is that United States has to import about $1 trillion products every year, and China export about $1 trillion products every year. This is kind of situation that can hardly be changed in the short term, in the foreseeable future in a way. Now the problem, of course, is that President Donald Trump's tariff war to the whole world has really brought about great uncertainty to this global economy. In that regard, I think that the good news is that China and probably the other major powerhouse or manufacturer house like Europe and Japan can maintain a kind of stability in terms of economic development, if not really slow down, but at least can be stable. It's the United States uncertainty from the United States that really gave us some worries about here. And of course, the other sense, like geopolitical issue, like the Ukraine war is still going on, the crisis in the middle still there, and three major indicators we look at global economy has been interrupted. Number one is that the direction of market development, we don't really know where the market is going. Before that, we can have the Boston Group, McKinsey Group, all those data can pretty much tell us about which direction the global market or global economy will go south or go north. That's first. The second, the price for the large commodities like oil, gas, grain, and timber, and oil, and all of this prices been quite uncertain. We really don't know, for example, how many dollars a barrel of oil in the 6 months or even 3 months period. Last but not the least, this kind of tariff war has also brought about great uncertainty about currency exchange rate. We don't know. It's all in a kind of chaotic situation. Given that, I think what really worries us is not really the economy is going well or not, is that we don't know what's going ahead, because especially when Donald Trump is so transactional, and also the quite a lot uncertainty about U.S. economy, especially it looks quite hot right now, but we know there's a build-up going on there, inflation and other things. So it's. And another major issue, of course, everybody worries about is the credibility of U.S. dollars as a global currency right now. It's also quite worrisome.
Of course, the Stockholm talks followed a deal with Japan and the biggest trade deal so far with the European Union, 15% on most EU goods exported to the US. An agreement, David, I think we can say has had a bit of a mixed reception amongst European leaders. What do you make of the EU deal?
I think that the initial response was very negative. I think a few days later, the EU-US deal is looking a little bit better, because this is a 15% rate inclusive, if you like, of other tariffs, whereas other US trade deals are that rate. For example, the UK is 10% plus the US most favoured nation rate of tariffs. So actually, the EU has done pretty well here. So has Japan. Both of them have unlimited exports to the US of cars, very sensitive product for the US, at those rates. They will be thinking, we got away with this. It could have been much worse. It could have been 30%. My take on it is that these tariffs are high. Certainly, they are going to cause an economic hit, but they are not so high that they are going to really disrupt the global economic system. And I think that when we look at what might happen with the US and China, whilst I take the point that nobody knows what will happen tomorrow, and clearly Trump having this absolute power to set the tariffs suddenly changes his mind, suddenly decides on something. But actually, in general, the numbers that have come out at the end of this process have been ones that we can work with that will allow the global economy to continue. And I think there's got to be some hope on that basis that whatever comes out of all of these US-China talks will actually be perhaps more positive, won't be something that it continues to be disruptive. Yes, it will be slightly problematic. We're not going to get away from President Trump's obsession with tariffs, but these no longer look like they're going to break the whole global trading system, at least not for the moment.
It sounds like what you're talking about then is reduced uncertainty. And I wonder what you think, Jeff. Do you think that Washington might feel that the agreement with Brussels then offers the US more leverage when it comes to trade negotiations with China?
It is difficult to figure out what Trump is thinking and how he may calculate things. But I do think that the EU agreement is fundamentally different than the situation from China. Our alliances with the EU are decades or even centuries long, whereas the tone and the atmosphere with China is much more adversarial. In addition, back in 2019, the trade negotiations were extensive. They resulted in a negotiated document 150 pages long going into the various issues. China eventually walked away from that document, but my point is that the US side understands very well what the problems are, what the complications are, and the negotiators, the lead negotiators, know each other from the previous round. So I don't think there are any illusions. And then the final wrinkle that has come up in the last few months is rare earths, where China has leverage that the Trump administration didn't really understand prior to these negotiations. And that has complicated things as well, I think, on the American side.
Andrew, what about the view from Beijing in terms of that EU trade deal? How do you think they're reading it?
Well, I think everybody is focused on the headline numbers. Is it 15%? Is it 20%, 19%, 30%, 40%? I think, everybody's focusing on that headline number and forgot the details of all these deals. And these deals are actually not a deal. They're actually a framework for which to discuss many, many issues. And a pattern is emerging for the US deals with the richer countries like EU, Japan, and South Korea. Now, in South Korea, some commitment of a $350 billion number. Japan is 550. EU is to buy 900 billion or 600 billion of oil, plus another investment fund of another number. So what this appears to me is that the framework is far more complex than most people realize. And Professor Huang's view that there seems to be two parallel tracks for which the interconnections, the entanglement issues have not been worked out is going to be pretty complicated. Ultimately, as we all agree, Mr. Trump will be very transactional and he'll come down one side or the other. But this is only a truce. I do not see this as a complete solution. The uncertainties are down a little bit, but these things can change tomorrow.
Jing, what is all this going to mean for trade in Asia with all of the different tariffs from China to Vietnam to South Korea to Japan, India?
Several issues here. Number one is that the main target for Donald Trump's trade war or tariff war is China, and China is not gave up anything. And actually, the overall view is that China actually is standing up towards Donald Trump, and eventually it's United States that has kind of caved in. The first. The second is that we see a pattern of behavior that President Donald Trump will declare or announce a big victory, a big deal is being achieved against Japanese or Europeans or Indians, Vietnam, Koreans. And then the other side gives a little bit different story, sometimes so different, we don't know what they're talking about. So in other words, they're not consistent. We have to hear different stories, especially with EU. We know EU is very fragmented in terms of decision-making. About this EU-US deal, we heard different stories from different countries, from Germans, France, or Hungary. They all gave you different stories. So as a result, it looks like we're into a situation that about all those deals, either with Koreans or Japanese or Europeans, is the end of beginning rather than the beginning of the end. It's just getting started. And as a result, people kind of have this kind of mindset or this kind of thinking that, okay, Donald Trump is not credible. He says he achieved a great deal, but the other side said not at all. So it looks like gradually we see a slide of credibility of U.S. side, either from Benson or from Donald Trump. Looks like they give a lot of big words, big victories or deals, but as a matter of fact, it's not the case at all. This seems give people, if not confidence, at least a kind of behavior or pattern. Say let's wait and look, wait and see what's really going on. That's an attitude or seems to be taken by the Indians, by the Vietnamese, even by Koreans and Japanese. Everybody is saying, let's wait and see. Of course, in that regard, this coming U.S.-China deal has become more and more important. My point here is that United States seems to be quite unsophisticated or premature to announce the big victory, big deals, and turned out it's not the case. I don't think that's good for United States at all.
What will it take to improve investor confidence in the longer term? Are we going to slowly get the certainty the markets are looking for?
I'm not sure we will. In fact, I think that for all the talk that there should be details to be worked out about these deals, I'm not sure they ever will be worked out. I think that President Trump, who has the full decision-making power here, is only really interested in the numbers, be they the tariffs or the claimed investments that are going to be made in the US. 3 months on from a UK-US deal, which was the first, there is no legal text from that, no sign of any progress towards the supposedly working out all the details that were promised. I'm told that there are quite severe staff shortages in the US administration in working on these things. It's quite clear that when discussions are held at lower levels than the president, none of those may be taken forward to the president. I think that in that instance, what we have to do for the next 3 years is it's about survival. It is not going to be about making any long-term plans. And I think the interesting thing for me, I'm starting to think out 3 years. Will this period just turn out to be a little bit of a cul-de-sac? We'll all forget about it in 3 years' time about these extra tariffs. Or does a future U.S. administration build on these tariffs and actually deliver phase twos? In which case, that does start to reshape the global economic system. But my feeling is that it's still going to be a numbers game in the medium term, in the next couple of years, and that will be the case also with the U.S. and China. Ultimately, President Trump will focus mostly on the number. Many of the other issues he just will not solve because I think, frankly, they are beyond his level of interest and potentially his level of kind of comprehension to resolve.
Jeff, what impact is all of this really having on the US economy?
You know, it feels like Trump has been in power during his second term for years, but in fact, it's only been 6 months. And with all of the announcements and all of the threats, the fact of the matter is that most of them have been paused. I mean, that's why we talk about the taco trade. So the impact on the US economy, despite those threats, has really not been felt yet. You know, in fact, announcements of tariffs or things like that really take a long time to be felt. You know, the goods have to be shipped and planned. Investments take time to plan. There are logistics involved. And then finally, you get to the consumer. So the answer is we don't really know. But we will know by a very important time, which is the midterm elections next year. It's a really open question. We will see the results of all of this by that midterm election. And that will be a verdict by the voters in the US on how successful Trump has been.
And Andrew, what about China? Or do you think that the West is less important and the global South is becoming more important in terms of trade?
Well, I don't think anybody thinks that the West is not important. The very fact that we're having negotiations is because the West is very important from everybody's point of view. The big problem is that there are people in the West who are feeling less secure. It's the insecurity that's driving all these conflicts or issues. I think that's the fundamental problem. Now, once the shocks are beginning to happen, whether you like it or not, everybody has to think about diversification. That's pure survival. If you really want to survive in a world that's going to be much more uncertain, you diversify. And so therefore, everybody's now thinking, well, where can we diversify to? And clearly the rise of the emerging markets or the global south is one possibility. But they are not yet the global weight as big as the advanced countries. So the big trade discussions are still with the West, but even the West itself is divided on how to handle this problem, and the global South itself is not fully united. So we're going to see basically self-preservation, everybody trying to self-strengthen, and then everybody trying to find as many allies as possible or trading partners as possible in order to avoid these, unforeseen shocks that came. If you think through it, most classical economies would not have predicted that we would get to this stage today.
Huang, what do you think? How do you think the world is changing in terms of trade, or has it done already?
I think the change is being made, like it or not. But the problem is that which direction this change will go. And talking about China, I think that if you look at the history of Chinese Communist Party, the strongest part of it is that it is very adaptive. It can always adapt to a new situation. So therefore, although there are many crises, there were many crises in the history, it can always go through it because it is adaptive, has a long-term plan, as consistent in terms of policy making, and also it has been quite sensitive to any factors that would sabotage or would undermine the so-called political social stability. They are very sensitive to that. In that regard, I think China's side is okay, even though we do see some difficult time ahead of time. It is on the United States, because one thing is that President Donald Trump has to deliver before, like Jeff says, the midterm is coming, and the window for him is not that long anymore, because so far, after 6 months, in my view, in terms of external policy or external affairs, he hasn't achieved much. The Ukraine war is still going on, the Middle East still in crisis. The so-called tariffs and has not really achieved, in my view, anything really substantial. A lot of talks, but not really much impact. And he has kind of urgent. I think he must feel this kind of urgency that he has to deliver before September, October, because if the beef is not there, and the voters might think otherwise. And so I think that's the issue. The irony is that the more kind of worry, the harder Donald Trump push for this sense, at least on the China side will stand firm. Never have I seen such kind of solidarity among Chinese policymakers on this kind of trade war or trade tariff or tariff war vis-a-vis the United States. Where everywhere I see is that they're determined that they're not going to give in. They are very much emphasized on the so-called equality and mutual respect on that. And but the good news, which I agree with David, say that I don't think the situation can be any worse than now. It could go any better. Maybe we're going to have a very dramatic turn of situation when the summit is coming, because I'm old enough to remember Nixon's visit to China in 1971, and of course there are a lot of expectations or some hope or wish, whatever. So maybe the two topmost leaders meeting or summit could make some substantial change, and which will be good news for all of us.
Huang Jing, David Henig, Jeff Moon and Andrew Sheng, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up on a future agenda, the war against extreme weather. Who is really in charge when it comes to fighting climate change? But for now, from me, Juliet Mann, and from all of the Agenda team here in London, goodbye.